Hey everyone, I'm Mina B, and for this video I'm doing things a little different than I normally do, and that is because I'm starting something called the Let's Chat series. For this video I am going to be sharing with you guys how I overcame depression holistically. So I started struggling with depression when I was around 5 years old. Now when I was 5, did I know I was struggling with depression? No, and I never went to see a mental health professional even at that age. The reason why I know is because once I became an adult and I started to go to therapy, I was able to look back at my life and say, oh, okay, I've been dealing with this for practically all my life. So when I was in elementary school, I basically was bullied a lot, and that really inflicted upon my self-esteem. I was teased. I'm 5'10", so I was always a big child. I was born 9 pounds, 12 ounces, and my mom used to say, like, when I was like 3 weeks old and people thought I was already 6 months. Like, I was a big child. So everyone always used to make fun of me because they thought I got left back in school. I had a huge overbite. And people used to call me Bugs Bunny because I have a gap in my teeth, and I still have it. Braces didn't change anything. I have a gap in my teeth, and I had this overbite, so my mouth wouldn't close, and so kids just found reasons to make fun of me for any little thing on my body. And I remember feeling very different from my peers. So a lot of the things they teased me about, like, you know, my friends didn't have Bugs Bunny teeth, and I was the tallest. I always had to be the girl who stood in the back of the line every single year within grade school. So I internalized that, and I was like, okay, maybe something is wrong with me. Then by the time I was 8 years old, my cycle started. So I was 8 years old with a period. Now, I'm sure you could imagine, I don't know if you guys have children or if you have nieces, little cousins, whatever, but imagine an 8-year-old with their period. Like, that's crazy. It's insane. So my body started to develop in ways that were very different from my peers. And when I came back to school and I told my friends I have something called my period, and I showed them my pads, and my mom even came up to the school and spoke to my teacher about it. Because I don't even think my mom was prepared, because she got her period at 15, 16, and so did my sister. So my mom just was not expecting something like that to happen to me so quickly. So she informed my teacher about what was happening, and my teacher was very understanding. And, you know, they had a little area where I had pads and all these different toiletries for me in case something were to ever happen to me while I was at school. So just talking to my friends and knowing that their bodies weren't bleeding once a month was just like strange to me. And at 8, who's gonna comprehend what that really means? So I just internalized a lot about myself, and even like body image, that made me feel very strange, like being super tall and knowing how my body was developing in ways that I didn't even understand. I just felt very weird about myself. So already from being in elementary school, I really just was growing up with a really bad self-esteem. Now my at-home life was very different. I am the youngest of 13 kids, y'all. They're all not from my mother. When my parents met, my dad had 11 kids, my mother had 1 kid, and then together they had me. And my parents are also immigrants, so they're both from Panama. However, they met here in America. So both of my parents are Panamanian and Colombian, specifically from San Andres, Colombia. And so because we have family in both Panama and Colombia, my house kind of was like the hub. So I remember my uncle moved from Colombia, and he came to America and stayed with us. And when my parents met, some of my father's children were still living back home in Colombia. So while I was already born at this time, and some of them started to migrate to America. So my house started to just get fuller and fuller with people that around that age, when I was in elementary school, I kind of started to feel a little lost in my home life because it was just so crowded. Like, there was so many people everywhere, and I kind of hid within the crowd, I would say. And so at school I was being bullied, and then when I came home I never really shared any of what was happening at school, because it's like so much was happening at home that I kind of got distracted by it, or I focused on my family more. And I also became an introvert because I was just always around so many people, and we were sharing rooms, and so many people were just always in and out of my house that that's how I started to develop a lot of my introverted ways. So that was my at-home life. And basically, once I reached middle school, things started to shift a little. So I still had a lot of issues with my self-esteem, feeling ugly, feeling all these things, but my body also started to develop in other weird ways. And I got braces when I was in 6th grade, and so that was helping me with like my teeth. And then I also like that, so I'm from New York City, specifically Queens, but for middle school my parents sent me to Brooklyn, so I was around like a whole different group of people. It was actually more diverse in that school than it was in my elementary school. I was primarily black at my elementary school, but in my middle school it was Italians, Irish people, Asians, blacks, like so many people, so many races, and I actually really liked that. So elementary school was kind of cool. I mean middle school was kind of cool. However, I found myself becoming very angry once I reached middle school. I can't necessarily pinpoint why. Well, as an adult I learned to pinpoint why. It's because I was freshly bullied. And so because I was like in this new environment, I wanted to make sure that people knew to stop to mess with me. But at the same time, I started to see a lot of people there who looked like me. So there were a lot of girls who were my height, maybe bigger than me. They were as skinny as me. A lot of people had braces. So with the diversity in my middle school, I feel like it started to shift how I saw myself a little. However, again, I still struggled with my self-esteem. And I started to just get angry, and I don't really know what caused a lot of it when I would lash out on people, but I would. I remember my one of my teachers told me to shut up, and this was like 7th grade, and I cursed her out. Like I was mad. She started crying. Like that's how bad it was. I'm in 7th grade and I made my teacher cry. That sounds very strange now as an adult, looking back, that a kid made an adult cry. But anyway, that's what happened. She called my parents, and my parents were yelling at me, and I never really was able to pinpoint to them like, oh, this is why I'm angry and this is what happened. None of that really. So I just remember just carrying a lot of anger. And by the time I reached high school, so actually let me backtrack. I also have to add this part in. My parents have a 20-year age gap, so by the time I also reached middle school, my dad became very sick. And the only reason why I'm bringing up the age gap is because my dad was much more older than my mother when he had me. So my dad was 55 when he had me. So by the time I reached middle school, my dad was already like in his late 60s. So he started to have a lot of medical complications, and he had about 2 heart attacks. He had to get a defibrillator. And he had diabetes. So he had a lot of things that I started to witness and see how his health was starting to really disintegrate, and that started to also impact me in middle school. So to move on into high school is when things got rough. Again, I was not necessarily bullied in high school. I was still carrying a lot of the hurt and the pain that I had from elementary school, and I carried that into high school, but things started to get a little different. Again, I started to develop. I was getting taller and taller. And as I was getting older and taller, I saw that my body was kind of like remaining the same, as in I was not getting the bigger butt that I wanted, and I was not getting the bigger breasts that I wanted. And so I still felt like this little girl who was in elementary school, except I was like 15. So that started to like make me feel a certain way about my body image, because all of my friends, their bodies were developing, and you know, just everyone in high school started to look different. And I was just like, why do I still look like this? Like, when are my breasts coming in? I would wake up every morning like, are they there? And they weren't. So I struggled with that, because I felt like beauty was really wrapped up in how my body was designed. And I also, I know that it affected me in regards to boys, because by the time I reached high school, I had never had a boyfriend. However, I have friends who have boyfriends all through middle school, and when I reached high school, I have friends who guys were always on top of them and always interested. And then for me, I found that I never really was interested in the boys that I saw, and it was clear that a lot of the boys weren't really interested in me. So that started to make me feel a certain way, because you see what your friends are doing, especially at that age when you're a teenager, and you just assume that, you know, this is the time when you're gonna get a boyfriend and all those things, and it just didn't happen for me. And so I started to just have like a lot of destructive thoughts around everything in general, not just relationships. I started to have a lot of destructive thoughts around my self-esteem. Like I said, I was in high school by this time, so my dad's health was getting worse and worse by the day. And I just started to feel very unhappy, like very, very unhappy and unsatisfied with life, and just started to feel very insecure. I felt very unintelligent. Like I always used to tell myself, I don't think that I'm gonna become anything or become anyone. Like, what's the point? Everything in life is meaningless. I'm meaningless. I just had like a very, very cynical perspective on life in general and on my life. And I remember I just started to engage in a lot of unhealthy practices. I remember starting to feel very, very low day by day. My eating habits were shifting. I was losing a lot of weight. I was struggling to get out of bed. I was just struggling to find joy. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to do anything. But I remember being that kid who always hid behind my accolades. I always made sure I brought home good grades, and I never cut class. Well, sometimes I did cut class actually. But I always made sure I was doing in school because I wanted to distract everyone around me from my true hurt and the pain that I was feeling. I didn't want anyone to really know that I was having the thoughts that I was starting to have, which was basically like I started thinking about taking my life. And so that thought started to become more of a reality, and next thing you know, I just started cutting myself. When I first started cutting myself, it was actually a suicide attempt. I was 16 when it started, and clearly it did not. I was not successful at that, which is a very good thing. However, through cutting, I felt like it felt a little cathartic, and I'm doing that only because it's a very dysfunctional practice. There's nothing cathartic about that. However, I have the clarity now as an adult where I can look back and say I normalized a lot of my dysfunction. And so because I couldn't find anything that made me feel good, when I started to cut, I internalized this as a practice that I felt like released a lot of my pain. Studies also show that people who cut tend to have difficulties in communicating and expressing their feelings, and I definitely had that problem. Like I said, at this age, my parents didn't know my struggles, my friends didn't know my struggles. I was just going through it, and I just started to develop this really bad habit to cutting myself. I would cut this whole area of my flesh would be bruises and hair and my thighs. And one summer I was working, doing some summer youth at a hospital, and I would cut all throughout the summer. And so like, it's crazy how someone can be suffering right in front of your face. And if we don't take the time out to really pay attention to them and what they're going through, like a lot of things can go over our head. And I only say that because, like I said, I was cutting all of my flesh, all of my arm, my forearm, and it was the summertime. So I was walking around with short sleeve shirts and everything, and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. Until this day, when I was working summer youth, and a girl, I assumed she just noticed the scars on my wrist, and she was like, "What's on your arm?" And the moment she said that, I was on guard because I knew what was on my arm. So I hid it from her. I remember hiding my arm behind my back, and I was just like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "What's on your arm?" And I'm still playing dumb. And then she literally grabs my arm. And first of all, when she grabs my arm, it hurt because I had like fresh wounds. Wounds that were just starting to heal. And then she saw the scars, and I remember her looking at me, and I just quickly pulled my arm away from her and I walked away. She never brought it up to me even though she continued to see me. And I'm sure she didn't know what to say to me. So around that time, that's when I started to feel like maybe I need to talk to someone, because I felt very embarrassed. There was a lot of shame. Shame is the proper word to use. So I remember, now to like shift that a little, I remember being at school one day and the cutting was still happening around that time, and I just was in the hallway. Everyone was gone. Class had already started, and I was walking around in the hallway, and I just started crying. Like, I broke down crying. And I don't remember who this woman, her name, but I remembered her, like, as I always saw her around in the school, basically. And so she knew me. And when she saw me crying, she asked me what was wrong, and I was just telling her, I'm not okay, I'm not okay. She took me to the school social worker, and that was like my first time really like doing therapy, I would say. And so she took me to the school social worker. However, I still didn't feel comfortable enough to tell the school social worker, hey, I want to kill myself, or look at all my scars. Like, I wasn't doing that. But it was good to talk to someone, because she really, really made me feel like she understood me. And when I would talk to her about things, I didn't necessarily have the urges that I would normally have to go home and cut myself. So basically, to fast forward, as time went by, the cutting had basically stopped. And it stopped because I was talking to this woman. Even like I said, I wasn't necessarily talking to her about the cutting, but just, it was just healing to have someone who I felt like really understood me. And then my friends became very, very intertwined in my life, and they were just like on top of me, to the point where I was just like, all right, if I was gonna cut, like, I don't even want to do this anymore. However, what I ended up doing was just, again, like I said, normalizing my dysfunction. And I went from one dysfunctional practice to another to another. And so when it wasn't cutting, I just remember being in a time frame in my life where I was having sex. I had started having sex, and I was just using my body as a form of self-harm. And what I want to say is, it was unhealthy sex. Unhealthy sex as in giving my body away to men who didn't deserve my body, who did not make me feel worthy, did not make me feel like I was enough, who did not necessarily value who I was as a woman. Giving my body away to men who basically used me as an object. And I remember when that was not something I was doing, I transferred that over into drinking a lot. So there was a time period where I just started drinking and drinking and drinking. And by this time, I'm in my early 20s now. And my drinking escalated to the point where everyone around me was just like, something's wrong. Like my mom, I was living with my mother at the time, and she would cry because she's just like, we don't have people in our family who struggle with alcoholism, and I don't understand where you got this from, because there was a bottle of wine in the fridge this morning and now it's gone, and it's like 6 hours later. And my excuse was, well, I'm not publicly intoxicated. So if I'm home and I'm drunk and I'm by myself and I'm isolated from my friends and all I'm doing is drinking in the basement, who cares? Clearly that's problematic. And so I realized that I really, really needed to do something about it, but I still didn't know how. And I remember, again, my anger was always present at this time in my life as well. So my anger never really went away. And I remember being in a car with my friend, and I was actually driving to church, and this taxi cab like cuts me off, and I just remember rolling my window down, cursing him out, and I took my water bottle and I threw it at him. Then maybe 15 minutes later, I'm thirsty and I'm looking for my water bottle, and I'm like, where's my water bottle? And my friend is like, you threw it out the window. And I'm like, no, I didn't. And she's just staring at me, because she's just like, you don't remember what happened 15 minutes ago? And I'm like, what does what happened 15 minutes ago have to do with my water bottle? And she's like, you don't remember being so angry that you picked your water bottle up and threw it out the car window? So we went on our way to church, and she was just like, girlfriend, I'm gonna need you to get some help. I think it's time for you to see a therapist for real. Like, it was something I was always talking about doing, but I never done it. And she was just like, since we're going to church, maybe you should ask someone in the church if they know anybody. And I personally wanted to see somebody who was licensed, because I just knew that the issues that I was having, I needed to sit down with a professional, someone who knew how to like sit with somebody in the midst of them feeling depressed and practically suicidal. So it worked out that when I got to church, I said, you know what, I feel safe, I feel comfortable, I'm just gonna do it, I'm gonna ask. And I found out that someone that I actually was familiar with was a licensed social worker. So I was 22 when I first started official therapy, where I was paying out of pocket, going to a therapist every week. And around that time, I was still managing my depression, but I was also still drinking. So that time period from being in therapy, I decided to get on antidepressants. However, maybe 3 months, and it was a very short time frame, I started to have like really dark thoughts, feeling suicidal. And we all know that, well, maybe we all don't know, but with antidepressants there can be some side effects. So I just assumed that these pills are not for me, they're not working, I need to get off of them. And my doctor took me off of them, and I was talking to my therapist about the process, and then it came out basically that I was drinking a lot while taking my antidepressants. So the alcohol was fighting against the antidepressants, and so alcohol is also a mood enhancer, right? And so it was not necessarily helping me with my depression, and on top of that, it was not helping me in the fact that I was taking medication. Like, I completely kept that a secret, and I was just like, no, this is not for me, like this is not working. So when I think about that time frame in my life, I'm just like, okay, I need to be mindful of what I'm putting in my body. I feel like when it comes to medication, most people are not thinking about how other things they're consuming can actually be affecting and stopping the medication from actually working. And that wasn't going through my mind. I was just so focused on drinking. So I clearly got off of the medication, but then the work was really to learn how to manage my drinking habits and understand like what was happening for me. Now at this time as well, I was in grad school. So this is the time in my life when I started to become a social worker. So I was in therapy working on myself while in grad school, and that was really meaningful to me because I personally, I always knew something was wrong with me. I was never in denial with the fact that I needed to get help. And so when I was 22 and I realized that I because of the things that I've struggled with, I wanted to work with people in this profession as well. Going to therapy was something that I kind of felt like was a necessity. So literally throughout the 2 years that I was in grad school, I spent time in therapy working on myself, like literally working on myself, because it was just very important to me that I learned how to manage my depression before I went into the field. And so through going to therapy, I was able to pull back a lot of the layers and dig deep into my childhood. And I literally had to go back to when I was 5 years old and confront my 5-year-old self and tell her she was going to be okay. Like, I did not know that as an adult, I was still carrying a lot of the wounds and the pain and the hurt that I was feeling from when I was 5 years old. I carried so much with me, and through going to therapy, I was able to really, really dig deep. I feel like, and this is actually something that I talk to my clients now about, since I'm a therapist now. I feel like we live in this world where we think like once we turn 18, we become adults, and then poof, our whole past is erased, and now we're adulting. And no, like, we're products of our past. We're products of our experiences. And so a lot of the time when we become adults, the way our past experiences shape how we see the future. It shapes who we are in the here and now. And so we have to make sure that a lot of the things that we've dealt with that probably brought us a lot of hurt and pain is uprooted. Because the thing is, those are seeds that get planted, and the more we suppress, what we're really doing is watering those seeds, and hate and hurt and pain and trauma is just blossoming and blossoming and blossoming. And then you're 25 years old trying to understand what's happening for you, when really there's a lot of things that's lingering in your heart that you have not confronted in your life. And so I had to confront a lot of things in my life. I had to go back to my elementary self. I had to go back to my middle school self. I had to go back to my high school self and talk to myself and really sit with a lot of the pain that I had so that I could move forward and really shift my thinking. I had to unlearn a lot of things and start relearning a lot of new things. And therapy was something that really, really helped me through that process. So that is basically when a lot of the healing started to come my way. I've always loved writing, and around the time I would journal. I started a blog when I graduated grad school, and it was just a very, very therapeutic time for me. And I had gotten into a point where I started to feel a little depressed again, and so I decided to get on antidepressants. And I was actually on antidepressants for a whole year. Around that time, while I was taking the antidepressants, I already started utilizing other practices where, you know, I was becoming healthier with my eating, healthier with my mind, healthier with my habits. And so I trusted myself enough to say, okay, this is going to be the point where I'm going to continue these healthy, holistic habits. So to talk about how I transitioned out of my depression, I basically shifted everything in my life. There were a lot of people, I wouldn't even say a lot. There were some people that were lingering around from my past that I realized there's no point in you being in my life. So I did have to cut some people off. I did have to remove some people from my circle because I needed to be around people who I knew were going to build me up and not keep me stuck or tear me down. So, or even were triggers for me in my life. So I remember just having to do a whole cleansing, a cleansing of people, a cleansing of my home and my physical space. And so when I say that, I mean literally going in my closet, cleaning out my closet, no longer holding on to stuff. Because I think a lot of the time we as people, we have a habit of wanting to hold on to things that really serve us no purpose. And it's not even people. Sometimes we go in our closets and we see that we have things that we haven't worn in 5-6 years, but we still have this idea that it's going to serve us one day. And so I just remember becoming this person who became really, really mindful of my environment, my literal space. And so I no longer wanted anything to be cluttered, because, and the reason why that was happening is because I would struggle with getting out of bed, and I would struggle with like finding my joy and always isolating. And I also knew that whenever I had like a messy room or when things were cluttered, I would feel a little more down and more depressed. So I had to take a look at my environment and see how can I freshen up my environment so that when I wake up, I can look around my room and feel inspired rather than being tired, you know? So it literally went from me cleaning out my closet, throwing away shoes, giving away clothes, being more neat as a person. I started buying plants. I became super obsessed with plants. I'm still obsessed with plants. But I took inventory of the space that I was around. If you wake up in the morning and your room is a mess, everything is cluttered, you're not necessarily going to have the motivation that you need to get out of bed, because your atmosphere really sets the tone for you. So when you're in a dark and gloomy, messy place, that can really affect your mental hygiene. So that was something that I started to be mindful of and take care of. I started to become very intentional when it came to hanging out with people, because I am someone who I enjoy being alone. And when I say that, I mean I'm the girl who has gone on vacation by myself. I take myself out to eat. I take myself to the movies. I'm very, very comfortable being alone. However, because I've struggled with depression so many times in my life, I find that I'll be in the midst of solitude and then the lines get blurred and it crosses over into isolation. And it's hard for me to pinpoint what's happening because I'm already so comfortable in being by myself that I don't necessarily realize. It's one thing to be in solitude and invite people in, but when I'm isolating, I'm pushing people away. And I had to become very intentional with like setting a schedule and saying I'm either going to call my friends on this day, and I would tell my friends, they knew what I was going through, so they also held me accountable. And this is why it's great to have people in your life who want to see you do better, because they were on board. They're like, all right, we're going to call each other at this time, and on these days we're going to hang out, we're going to do these things. Even if it's something as simple as I'm going to go to your house, that's free. You live down the block, I'm going to go to your house, I'm going to hang out for a few hours, and I'm going to go back home, so that I'm outside, I'm getting vitamin D from the sun, I'm breathing in fresh air, and I'm just around other people. I'm in the midst of community, and that was very, very important. I also started going to the gym. Exercise is very, very important for your brain. It's important for your stimulation. It just has so many benefits. And I realized that when I exercised, I really felt much better. So even until now, I exercise on a routine. I exercise 3 or 4 times a week, and I literally go to the gym as soon as I wake up. As soon as I wake up, I drink a smoothie, and then I'm off to the gym. I found a way to be very consistent by just figuring out what time of the day the gym makes me thrive. And I've realized that as soon as I wake up in the morning, the gym, my mind is on the gym, and that's where I'd rather be, versus in the past I would go late at night, and then I would just be like, oh, I've been home all day, I might as well stay home, what's the point of going out? So I had to set structure around allowing exercise to be an intentional practice. And if you don't have a gym membership, you can work out at home. There's times where I put YouTube on my TV, and I do yoga with Adrienne, and I do other exercises at home so that I can always stay stimulated. I also changed my eating habits. I truly believe that what we put in our bodies can affect our mental wellness, not just our physical health. And so I want to start off by saying I'm not a vegan. However, I eliminated a lot of things that I know just weren't good for me. So fast food, fried food, eating a lot of carbs. I pay attention to my body, and this is important. I pay attention to my body, and I began to realize that when I ate certain things, I would feel very sluggish. And I also paid attention to the time of day that I would eat. So I'm the type of person that literally after 7 p.m., the most I might want to eat is a bowl of cereal. If I eat a whole meal, I feel like I wake up groggy. I drink a lot of water now, and again, I'm just mindful of how I eat and what I'm putting into my body on a conscious level. Now, to also factor that in, another way that I cleansed my space and my atmosphere and began to heal was paying attention to the things that I was absorbing. So food is one of those things, but I think as people, we forget that once we put ourselves out there in the world, we're sponges, and we're soaking it all up, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. And I'm a big believer in consistently elevating myself every moment of the day. And so I started to pay attention to the music that I was listening to, because since I grew up very angry all the time, I started to have this obsession with rap music. So all throughout middle school, that time frame when I was super pissed, cursing my teachers out and everything, I was a big fan of Dipset. And I loved Joel Santana, and I loved Cameron, and I loved Ja Rule, and I loved 50 Cent. And I would just like blast this, I'ma kill you in your sleep, and I'ma shoot your grandmother type music. And it was like therapeutic for me, because in my mind, the things that I wanted to do to people, they were rapping about. So I had to pay attention to what I was absorbing, and I realized the music was not necessarily helping me. It was just adding to my frustration. It was adding to my anger. It was inspiring me in ways that were not good. And then I also started to pay attention to TV shows. Ratchet TV is not helping me be a better person. It's entertainment for a few laughs, but after you turn the television off, like, what did you learn about yourself, about society, about personal development? Nothing. I think a lot of people forget that healing comes with sacrifices. I had to make a lot of sacrifices to change the things that were happening for me because I just wanted to be better. And this is a part of doing the work. This is a part of knowing that you have to show up and you have to do the work. Because even though I was going to therapy, doing all these things and talking to my therapist didn't get on a train with me and ride the subway with me to my house and help me cook dinner and monitor the TV shows that I watch and then tuck me into bed. That's not what a therapist does. So it was my job to say, okay, I'm committed, I'm going to therapy, I'm doing this, but however, I still need to show up for myself in ways, and I was gaining the tools that I needed from my therapist so that I could be consistent with my life and pay attention to the things that I knew I needed to be doing to be better and to do better, because that's what I wanted for myself. So that is kind of like a gist of everything, and I'm really happy that I did that for myself because, like I said, now I'm in a position where I am a therapist and I want to make sure that I am always okay and I'm always operating as my best self before I am pouring into other people. So that's basically it for this video, and I really hope that this inspires you. I want you all to know that you're not alone in the midst of your struggles. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Depression affects millions in this world. Mental illness affects millions in this world, and I hope that as a culture and a society we can start to change the conversation around mental health where there are no more stigmas attached to it, because I think that's stopping a lot of people from getting the help that they need. And I hope that this video can inspire you and know that your life is worth its best chance. So if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button as well as subscribe to my channel. Down below in the description box, you will find links to catch me outside of YouTube. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next time.